Welcome to the Life's Playbook podcast. Today, let's talk the talk college football, more specifically, the college football playoff bracket that has been dropped today. This is the official set in stone college football playoff bracket. We're going to dive into the teams that made the cut, talk about some teams that I think should have made the cut. We're going to talk about the teams that did not make the cut. Let's get into it. College football playoff bracket dropped today on December 8th. That's today, this Sunday. I thought I'd share my opinion on it. It's the first 12-team playoff in college football history. Again, this move was to give some of the smaller, lesser colleges a shot at the playoffs. Let's take a look at who made it, who didn't make it, and if there are any stretches or not. Again, you can find the official college playoff bracket on the NCAA website. Let's get into it. We're going to start from 12 all the way to 1. Let's get into it. Starting at number 12, we have ranked 16 Clemson. They played in the ACC championship game yesterday against SMU. They beat SMU yesterday by a walk-off field goal. They won that game 30-31. They are 12th, ranked 16th in the country overall. I think this is well-deserved spot for Clemson. Number 11 is SMU. They are 10th overall in the country. Honestly, I think it's interchangeable between them and Clemson. I think they should be 12th and Clemson should be 11th, but it is what it is. They're at 11 in the college football seedings, ranked 10th overall. They actually got in over Bama, who was a 9-3 team, and they were one of the first teams for the first time ever not in the college football playoffs. But they made it in over Bama. I think it's well deserved for SMU. I didn't think Bama was after that loss to Oklahoma. I didn't think Bama was the same Bama, and apparently that's what the committee thought as well. I think that was a good call to leave them out. However, SMU, they did lose to Clemson, and Clemson going into that game was 10-2. So that might be a small stretch putting them over Clemson at 11. But that's where they're ranked. Let's move on to number 10, which is the Cinderella team, in my opinion, Indiana. Indiana is ranked 10th in the college football playoffs, and they are ranked 8th overall in the country. Indiana, again, is that Cinderella team. Nobody expected to see them at all. Nobody expected a lot out of Indiana. But Coach Signetti really got those boys going. They did lose to Ohio State, who is on here, by the way. They did lose to Ohio State, and I think it's a little bit of a stretch to put them at 10 because if you look at the schedule that Indiana has played, they don't really have a very impressive resume. The really only tough team they played was against Michigan, and we know how that went. They just barely scraped by Michigan. But well-deserved, especially considering the circumstances and especially considering that nobody thought Indiana was going to make it this far. They are 10th in the playoff bracket, 8th overall in the country. Moving to number 9. Number 9 is Tennessee. Tennessee, I think this is a bit of a stretch because they were in competition with schools like Ole Miss and Alabama and South Carolina. All those other colleges, by the way, are 9-3. They are still ranked in the country, but they did not make the cut for the college football playoffs. But Tennessee was one of those teams for the longest time that was in competition with those teams for a spot. They faced Georgia, who was also on here. They faced Georgia and lost, which didn't hurt them as much. But again, this is an exciting team. They will be playing Ohio State, who is 8th. 8th on the college football playoff bracket. They are 6th overall in the country. Obviously, as I said in my last video, that loss to Michigan would shift the college football playoffs somewhat drastically, and it did in the case of Ohio State. I'm an Ohio guy myself, and I am amazed that we dropped this far. I'm amazed that we are at 8, but I'm glad we're here, and hopefully Ohio State can make things interesting against Tennessee. They are 6th They dropped to 6th overall in the country, ranked 8th in the college football playoffs. Well-deserved spot despite the loss to Oregon and Michigan. Moving to number 7, we have Notre Dame. Notre Dame, well-deserved spot. I think they're just fine where they're at. They're ranked fifth overall in the country. Well-deserved spot, especially after that crushing loss to Northern Illinois earlier this year. I love the way they finished their season, winning out, and they're actually one of the few teams on here that I think has an impressive win against another top 25 team. They beat Army earlier in the year. So congrats to Notre Dame. I think this is well deserved. They are 7th in the college football bracket, which leads us to number 6, Penn State. Penn State is number 6 in the college football playoff bracket. They are 4th overall in the country. Obviously, that seeding has to do with the Ohio State loss to Michigan. I think it's a bit of a stretch that they're at 6th because just like Indiana, they haven't really played anybody that tough. The toughest they faced was Ohio State, and even then they still lost that. So I think the fact that they are 2 ranks ahead of Ohio State is a bit of a stretch. Again, that is a little bit of spicy, but they are 4th in the country. Stood their ground against Oregon yesterday in the Big Ten championship. They deserve a spot, but 6th, in my opinion, is a little bit of a stretch. I don't think they should be above Ohio State at least, but they are 6th in the college football playoff bracket, which brings us to the top 5. Number 5, we have Texas. Texas lost yesterday to Georgia, who was on here. They lost in the SEC championship game in overtime to Georgia, 22-19. Texas is ranked 3rd overall in the country. Well-deserved spot. Nothing really changed for them overall. They did drop a little bit, but nothing changed really overall for them. Well-deserved. They deserve to be here. I think if they make a deep run, they could potentially face Georgia again, and we could be looking at a Texas and Georgia national championship, but that's a discussion for another day. Texas is 5 on the college football playoff bracket, which leads us to number 4. Number 4, surprise team that I didn't expect to see at all in the college football playoff, and I know many of you probably didn't expect to see this team either, but that team is the Arizona State Sun Devils. They are 12th overall in the country, and they are ranked 4th in the bracket. They are one of the conference champions, so they naturally get a first-round bye. They are 4th. They beat Iowa State yesterday in convincing fashion. Iowa State, I picked them to beat ASU yesterday, and that didn't happen. Well-deserved spot for Arizona State. This was a sleeper team that really none of us expected to get this far, but here they are at number 4, 12th overall in the country. Well-deserved spot, well-deserved first-round bye. Congratulations, Arizona State. I have no problems with that ranking. Number 3, no problems with this ranking. We all know it to be Boise State. They are ranked 9th in the country overall. No problems there. Well-deserved. They beat UNLV, not in a dominating fashion like we'd expect, but they did just enough to beat UNLV Friday night. 21-7 was the score of that game. Congratulations, Boise State. No complaints there at number 3. Number 2 and number 1 are kind of obvious. Number 2 is Georgia. They're ranked 2nd in the country. Well-deserved placements and seedings for both. Georgia beat Texas twice now. No problems there. And number 1 is Oregon. Obviously the only undefeated team in college football. Dominated the Big Ten. Dominated Penn State. No problems with those seedings. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where's Alabama? It's the first time in college football history that I know of that Bama is not in the college football playoffs. Bama is one of those teams that didn't make it. They finished 9-3. Going down the list, Bama is ranked 11th. They were the first team out of the college football playoffs, along with Miami. They were the second team out. Ole Miss was the 3rd team, and South Carolina was the 4th. You know, when you look at this playoff bracket, There are teams on here that are well deserved where they should be. They're perfect where they're at. And then there are other teams on here that, again, Indiana, SMU, even Clemson, even Clemson, given that they started the season rough, but there are some teams on here again that I think got a little bit of a stretch from the committee, like Penn State and SMU being over Clemson. I mean, they're 11-2, sure, but they just lost yesterday in the ACC championship. But they're interchangeable. Indiana, I think, is a little bit of a stretch too. I don't think they should be. I mean, they didn't really play anybody tough, but compared to, I guess, the ACC teams, they did better than what most would expect. I think Penn State at 6. A little bit of a stretch. I think they should be 8, and Ohio State should be 6. But again, the magnitude of that loss to Michigan, very, very. So it's understandable that they would be ranked ahead of Ohio State, both nationally, seating wise. There's one thing I want to point out in this college football playoff bracket, though, that I'm sure this will be the talk of the town, is that there's one thing that all 12 of these teams, besides Georgia and Texas, obviously, and Tennessee, and in my opinion, Notre Dame. But when you look at the other teams in this college football playoff bracket, you'll notice that they all have one thing in common: the strength of schedule. Now, what does this mean? Some teams got in here on easy schedules. Other teams, like, again, the SEC teams, came in on difficult schedules. Indiana, Penn State, arguably Ohio State, and arguably Oregon, even though they dominated the Big Ten championship. They all had easy schedules for the most part, especially Indiana and Penn State. But when you look at this college football playoff bracket, strength of schedule, and when you look at what happened with Alabama, and when you look at what happened with Ole Miss and South Carolina, you'll notice the common theme that the committee felt was the theme to make these decisions off of. You'll notice that the strength of schedule meant absolutely nothing to the committee, and this was clearly based on records, not strength of schedule. This was based on who had the better record, as opposed to last year, 2023, when it was based on who was a more exciting team to watch. Now, not saying there aren't any exciting teams in this bracket that's been dropped, but I mean, SMU losing to Clemson by 3. I mean, do they really stand a chance against the Penn State? Do they stand a chance against Boise State? They certainly don't stand a chance against Georgia. They don't, I mean, and Indiana, they don't stand a chance against Notre Dame. They certainly don't stand a chance against Georgia, but they're here. And I think had the committee gone with strength of schedule over record, this college playoff bracket would be vastly, vastly different. I don't even think SMU or Indiana or Clemson would even be on here if they went with strength of schedule. Those 3 teams would probably have been replaced with, like, maybe an Ole Miss or South Carolina or a Bama. Personally, I think Bama not being in this is good for college football, because if they had put Bama in, this would have shattered a lot of college football fans. People would be outraged if Bama was in here. A 9-3 team making the playoffs, that would not look good for the sport. That would not look good for the brand. But nonetheless, that didn't matter. And me personally, I'm okay with the fact that they're not in. It would have been cool, however, to see, like, South Carolina in there, or Ole Miss thrown in there, or maybe BYU. BYU did so well this season. They did so well but towards the end is where they kind of dipped, and that's why they're not in. Miami also did very well this season, but losing to Georgia Tech really hurt them. Just like Bama losing to Oklahoma really hurt them. If Bama had beat Oklahoma, they probably would have been in. They probably would have been in if they beat Oklahoma. Miami probably would have been in if they beat Georgia Tech. but it is what it is. The committee clearly thought strength of schedule and resumes didn't matter here. In my opinion, I think that they looked at the teams with the better records, which could be why SMU is ahead of Clemson, because 11-2 does look better than 10-3. But the committee looked at these records and they thought whoever has the best records, whoever has the cleaner record, the nicer looking record, they're going to get in. We don't care about the strength of schedule. We don't care about the fact that Ole Miss beat Georgia, but Bama beat Georgia. They weren't going to do that whole mess. They just said, well, Georgia's got a better record than both those teams. We're going to put them in. Clemson's got a better record than Miami. We're going to put them in. So it's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of debates to be said. I know some people are going to be upset with certain teams not being in. I know some people are going to make arguments for certain teams being in that really shouldn't be in based on the strength of schedule. But again, the theme of this playoff bracket, when you look at all the teams that are on here, the theme of this playoff bracket was clean, better looking records. If you didn't have a better looking record, you weren't going to make it. You're 9-3, you weren't going to make it. And I can understand the arguments for certain 9-3 teams not being in, but it is what it is. Records is what mattered this year. It wasn't based on who was the most exciting. It wasn't based on strength of schedule. It wasn't based on conference, who had the better, more tougher conference. It was based on records. Overall, I think the rankings are fine for the most part for some teams. Again, I would move some teams around. I would even argue that certain teams shouldn't be on here myself, but I think for the most part, if I had to change a team on here, it would probably be swapping Clemson and SMU, switching their ranks around, and switching Ohio State and Penn State's ranks around. But that would be it for the most part if I were in charge of this bracket. I think there are some good teams on here that deserve to be here and others shouldn't. That's a discussion for another day. But that is the 2024 to 25 college football playoff bracket. Again, you have 12 Clemson, 11 SMU, 10 Indiana, 9 Tennessee, 8 Ohio State, 7 Notre Dame, 6 Penn State, 5 Texas, 4 ASU, 3 Boise State, 2 Georgia, and 1 Oregon. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with the top 5. Nothing wrong at all. All those spots are well deserved, but it's every spot from 6 and below. You could make arguments that some teams should be switched around or some teams shouldn't be there, and it's understandable. But that is your 2024 to 25 college football playoff bracket. Congratulations to all the teams that made it. Certainly well deserved. And hopefully this will be an exciting playoff. I think it'll be an exciting playoff. Again, being an Ohio State fan, I hope the Buckeyes bring it against Tennessee. I hope we play the way we played prior to Michigan. If that Buckeye team shows up, we'll stand a good chance. But that's your 2024-25 college football playoff bracket. That is the breakdown of the college football playoff bracket. Again, there are some teams that could have made the cut. There are some teams that shouldn't have made the cut. And you can make arguments for those teams. That is your 24 to 25 college football playoff bracket. I will see you guys on December 22nd. Stay tuned for that. The Life's Playbook podcast is available on Spotify now. So this video will be on Spotify as well as my official YouTube page. But yeah, that's your college football playoff bracket. I'll see you December 22nd for the first official episode. Till then, stay tuned.